For the past few weeks, we've been in the middle of this message series called My Imperfect Family, and I don't know if your family is like anything like mine, but mine's a little imperfect. And thinking about families, one of the most important things about families is that they help people come together and have a place to belong. And that's one of the things that we've been talking about also over the past few weeks, about having a place to belong. And next week is a special Sunday. It's our Next Step Sunday, where you have a chance to join one of our belong groups. We've been talking about them for a few weeks. These are new small group opportunities, about 8 to 12 people, and some of them may be even larger to start. 8 to 12 people that are all about doing life together, about getting to know one another, build deep connections and relationships with one another, to also kind of dig deeper and learn more about what God may have to do in your life of growing in faith by reflecting on scriptures from Sunday and by seeing what the message may have to say in your own life. And so these are groups that are going to be starting in just a couple weeks now, in the middle or at the beginning of September. And so we're going to start signing up for these groups and registering for these groups next week. And here's the thing: now next week you're going to have a chance to meet some of our group leaders, whether they're going to be here in person or whether they're going to have like an avatar here. I think we need to work on that. Maybe somebody can't be here. AJ, your mom is going to lead one, and maybe if we can get a big life-size cutout of her, and if she's watching today, then she can send me hate mail about that suggestion. But anyways, I'm excited about this, and I hope that you are as well. And here's the thing: if you sign up for a group, you're like, I don't know, there's a few groups to choose from. I don't know which one's right for me. Once you sign up, if you don't like the folks, you can just try to belong with some other folks and just like switch around until you find a group that fits for you, that seems right for you, and just try it on as we try on this together, trying to find more places for people to belong and connect. So I'm really excited about this opportunity, and I hope that you will consider this as well. So next week is Next Step Sunday, and part of that Next Step Sunday is signing up and starting our belong groups. It's really a chance to help other people to belong and help you find that place to belong as well. And thinking about family, I was reflecting this past week about we're getting close to fall break and how that's coming up. And my family, we've been trying to think of, are we going to try to do a vacation this year? And I got, my leg was twisted and coerced enough to saying, okay, yes, we're going to do a vacation. I don't know why you do vacations with kids, because it's hard at home and then it's even harder when you're on the road. But evidently it makes memories. But I remember this one memory of doing a vacation, and I don't even remember if I had kids at the time, but my family, we were, I think my siblings and my wife, and we were all meeting together in Florida. What we did is you do what you do today, and you put your GPS, you log into your destination in your GPS, and then you start your trip. And this trip we were using several years ago, and we were using one of these smartphone apps, GPS apps, and this one was supposed to be smart enough to tell you what the traffic was like, to warn you when the cops were ahead of you and all this kind of stuff. And so this was my first time trying this app that was supposed to be super smart and help me hack the trip. And so I started driving south, and we were sailing. The whole trip was going great. And then I got this alert on my smartphone that said, traffic ahead. There's about a 30-minute delay in traffic ahead. It's like, oh, great, we're going to be sitting in traffic for a half hour. But then it gave us this cute warning. There's traffic ahead, but I have an alternate route for you that will save you these 30 minutes. And all you have to do is exit the interstate in Florida, and you can go on your way and drive around the traffic jam, which is about 2 miles long. And so, of course, I was smarter than everybody else on the road, and so I took that detour with glee, and as soon as I took that detour, I knew it was a mistake, because everybody else took the detour too. And it was, we were in rural Florida, and I don't know how this is possible, but rural Florida did not have, there's not a mountain in sight, so they're perfect line of sight, but there was no cell towers, there was no cell coverage. And so the smartphone app was not smart enough to know that hundreds of people were flooding onto this 2-lane road with a stop sign instead of going around and staying in this traffic jam. And so what we did is we continued to create a traffic jam that allowed us to save that 30 minutes of sitting in the traffic by sitting in traffic for 2 hours in rural Florida. So I really appreciated the way that happened, just kind of sitting in traffic on that 2-lane road in rural Florida. But if you think about it, sometimes life is like that. Sometimes you're sailing along, things are going great, and then there's an interruption. There's a traffic jam. There's something that just stops you dead in your tracks, and you're like, changes everything, and you have to figure out how to readjust in life. And sometimes that happens in different ways in life, and it happens in families, it happens in life in general. And oftentimes what happens is that everyone it can be happy mostly, everyone can be healthy mostly, and then things happen. And sometimes what happens is that people get sick. Maybe it's a child. Maybe it's a spouse or a parent in your life who gets sick. And of course, I don't mean getting a cold or a stomach bug. These are like a dime a dozen in my family. We got 4 kids, and so somebody's always getting sick. But it don't mean like that. I mean, like somebody gets really sick, chronically sick or life-threatening sick. And when this sickness happens, when somebody really gets sick, often what happens, it happens all of a sudden, and you're forced to recalculate, you're forced to figure out how to do life from this point forward. You know, for the past few weeks, we've been looking at and talking about families and imperfect families and looking at different imperfect families in the Bible. And today, we're going to look back at imperfect families by considering what happens when someone gets sick. The story I want to share with you today comes from the book of Mark in the Bible. And the book of Mark is in the New Testament. And as it's one of what we call a gospel. It tells the story, the good news about Jesus. The book of Mark tells the stories about the life and the ministry of Jesus. And today we're going to look at a story where Jesus interacts with a family of somebody who has a sick person at home. If you got your own Bible and you want to follow along, I'm going to be reading from Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 21. And here we read this, that Jesus crossed the lake again, and on the other side, a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. And this happens a lot, that Jesus is crossing the lake and going from town to town, and then there's crowds that end up showing up. And I don't know how word spreads, but word spreads quickly, and people end up showing up to see Jesus. And what we learn in the next verse is that Jairus, one of the synagogue leaders, came forward. So Jesus has been on the lake, he gets to the other side, and there's this big crowd here. And right now, we know that there's a guy in the crowd, Jairus, who shows up. And all we know about him is that he is a leader of the synagogue. Now the synagogue is like the church for first century Jews. And later we learn a little bit more about Jairus. We'll learn that he has a daughter, and he also has a family. He's at least married. He's got some other people in his family. And we also learn that when Mark says that Jairus is one of the leaders of the synagogue, we learn that he at least had some importance in the community. The synagogue was like the center of Jewish life, and so Jairus, he was one of the leaders. That means that he presided over things, he helped make sure that things happened in the religious life of the community, and he would have been one of the most well-respected men in the whole community. What this means is that he was living a life that most of his contemporaries would have loved to have. He had the family, he had the job, he had the role, the respect, and most other people would probably love to have been in his shoes. We don't know all that much else about him, but he had it all in his life and in his world. And everything was just fitting right into place. But then something happened. Something happened, and his kid got sick. We continue reading about this in the second half of verse 22, when it says that when Jairus saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, and he pleaded with him, "My daughter is about to die. Please come and place your hands on her so that she can be healed and live." Now, at this point, we kind of need to know that Jesus was not always the favorite of the religious leaders at the time. In fact, the religious leaders were often skeptical of Jesus and hostile to Jesus. And here is Jairus, one of the respected religious leaders. People looked up to him perhaps, or at least he thought he had a reputation to uphold. But here he is. He forgets about his position. He forgets about his dignity. He forgets about any prejudice that he might have had against Jesus. And all he wants is for his little girl to get better. All he has concern for is his little girl who's sick. He's desperate. He has heard perhaps that Jesus has healed some other people. He has heard that Jesus is perhaps showing up, and so he needs to just kind of lay it all on the line. And so what does he do? He takes just kind of a small step, and he goes and asks for help. He takes a small step and asks for help. He gives up himself. He gives up his dignity and his pride. He gets down on his knees and pleads with Jesus. You know, often when someone gets sick, this same thing happens in one way or another. You throw yourself at different doctors. You try to find a solution. You try to work the plan. You try to find treatment. And you get second opinions. You ask for advice. You pray and you ask God for healing. You just throw yourself into caring for the person who is sick and trying to find an answer. And so what does Jesus do? He listens to Jairus. He listens to Jairus, and he starts following him, going to his house. But something else is going to happen in the middle of this, because this event is not just about Jairus. The story continues in verse 24, that a swarm of people were following Jesus. It wasn't just these two. A swarm of people were following Jesus and crowding in on him. And a woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a lot under the care of many doctors and had spent everything she had without getting any better. In fact, she had gotten worse. Because she had heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothes. She was thinking, well, if I can just touch his clothes, maybe I'll be healed. And her bleeding stopped immediately. And she sensed in her body that her illness had been healed. And at that moment, Jesus recognized that power had gone from him. And he turned around in the crowd and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, don't you see? There's a crowd pressing in around you, yet you ask, who touched me? I mean, Jesus, like, why would you ask this? There's a whole bunch of people here. But Jesus looked around to carefully see who had done it. Now, there's a lot here that could be said, a lot here that we could unpack about this woman and her need for healing that she couldn't find here from doctors and from people here on earth. And then she touched Jesus and she was healed. But today we're following Jairus' story. And I can't help but wonder, what is he thinking as this is happening? I mean, at this point in the story, Jesus and his followers are following him home to try to help his daughter who is near death. And in the midst of this journey, a woman is healed, but at this point, nobody other than Jesus is aware that the woman has been healed. So the disciples, the followers of Jesus and Jairus, they don't know what's happening. And in fact, when Jesus asked about somebody touching him, his followers are just kind of like, you must be crazy. There's tons of people around here. Everybody's touching somebody else. Of course somebody touched you. Let's get on with this. And I have to wonder about Jairus. What's he thinking? Why are we stopping? Why are we stopping? My little girl doesn't have time. I don't have time to deal with this nonsense. We just need to move on. You know, I thought Jesus was going to help, but now he's concerned about somebody touching him. I mean, who is this guy? Everybody is touching me. Who is this guy? Why is he worried about somebody touching him? Why is he complaining about it? Is he too good for the rest of us? Plenty of people have touched other people in this crowd. We need to get going. My little girl doesn't have much time. He's full of worries of a worried parent. He's full of worries of a worried caregiver. He knows that they're in a desperate situation right now. But things are about to change. And Jairus is about to see a healing with his own eyes. And maybe as he sees this healing, it serves as a small step, an incremental step of encouragement and miracle to him in the midst of it. The story continues in verse 33. The woman, full of fear and trembling, came forward, knowing what had happened to her. And she fell down in front of Jesus and told him the whole truth. And Jesus responded, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace, healed from your disease." Maybe with this, Jairus' faith grows just a little bit. He sees a miracle, and he begins to see God's faithfulness in the journey. Maybe maybe Jesus is someone who can help. I was pleading before, but I've seen him heal somebody, and it didn't take all that much. Maybe Jesus can actually help me. Maybe his faith is starting to be kindled. His hope is starting to be kindled that maybe Jesus might have a solution for his life and for his sick daughter. Maybe just being with Jesus is showing him that there is hope in the midst of things being hard. As this faith grows, though, he's about to get some bad news. And doesn't that just happen? It seems like when things are going well, and maybe you've got a little bit of a positive stuff, you get some bad news, have to deal with the bad news, and that happens here. While Jesus, in verse 35, while Jesus was still speaking with her, the woman that had just been healed, messengers came from the synagogue leader's house saying to Jairus, your daughter has died. Your daughter has died. Why bother this teacher any longer? I mean, when you get bad news, it's easy to lose hope. I mean, he was going for hope. He was going for healing for his daughter, and then he gets this news that she's dead, and I imagine that the bottom just drops out. And any step towards faith, any step towards hope is just lost. When you get difficult news, it's easy to give in. In the next verse, but Jesus overheard their report. He's listening. And he said to the synagogue leader, don't be afraid. Just keep trusting. Don't be afraid. Just keep trusting. Jesus knows that even in the face of difficult news, it's important to continue in faith and to see small glimpses of hope in places around. And then Mark tells us the rest of the story. This is verse 37. That's Jesus, didn't allow anyone to follow except Peter, James, and John, James's brother. These are his disciples, Jesus' followers. And they came to the synagogue leader's house, and he saw a commotion, and people were crying and wailing loudly. And he went to them and said, what's all this commotion and crying about? This child isn't dead. She's just sleeping. They laughed at him, but he threw them all out. Then taking the child's parents and his disciples with them, he went to the room where the child was. Taking her hand, he said to her, Talita kum, which means, young woman, get up. Young woman, get up. And suddenly the young woman got up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old, and they were shocked. And after seeing evidence of Jesus' miracles all along the way, now Jairus has the hope that Jesus can really bring, and his daughter is healed. And as great as this story ends, this is not the first miracle that Jairus sees. It's not the first miracle that he saw. In fact, he saw miracles all along his journey. It just so happened that he was able to find Jesus at the right time and in the right place to make contact with him. And that's a miracle. It just so happened that he witnessed the miracle of Jesus healing somebody on the way to heal his daughter. I mean, that is a miracle. And then when Jairus received the bad news that his child was dead, he receives the comforting words of Jesus, don't be scared. Just keep having faith. Words of miracle that provided hope and comfort to sustain him dealing with the stress of his daughter's sickness. When we think about this imperfect family that faced this illness, what does this mean for you? What does this mean for us? What does this mean for you? You know, you might notice that the story begins when Jairus goes to plead with Jesus. I love this. He gives up his respect and everything and just goes to plead with Jesus for his daughter's life. You know, we have another word for pleading with Jesus these days, and it is prayer. Prayer is another word for pleading with Jesus. And when you're faced with illness in your family or in your life, one of the first things that you can do is to pray. Now, I realize that it's easy for me to say that, and maybe you're thinking, well, prayer seems pretty weak if I'm faced with something really hard. I realize that the idea of prayer may not seem like it's enough. I realize that the idea of prayer in the face of illness, when your family is facing illness, may not seem like really much, but I want you to know that prayer has power. And it's not like it's a prayer versus medical treatment thing. It's a prayer to pray and to seek medical treatment thing. An early leader in the faith, a guy by the name of Paul, was writing about the importance of prayer to early Christians, and he was encouraging people in this. And in fact, he wrote to some Philippians, Christians that were living in the town of Philippi, in Philippians chapter 4, saying this: "Don't be anxious about anything. Rather, bring up all your requests to God in your prayers and petitions, along with giving thanks. And then the peace of God that exceeds all understanding will keep your hearts and your minds safe in Jesus Christ." But what about when prayer doesn't seem enough? What about when prayer doesn't seem enough? I imagine that Jairus has this concern when he threw everything out the window and just tried to find hope in Jesus. What if it's not enough? Some of the best advice for these times that I've ever heard comes from this guy named Pete Greig. And Pete is a leader in prayer. In fact, he leads an international prayer movement called 24/7 Prayer. And he speaks about prayer around the world. He leads prayer, and he's an amazing teacher when it comes to prayer. And Pete's advice about this is when you're faced with something that's really big and it seems as if like it's too big to pray about, or it's too big to even think that God can do something about it, Pete's advice is this. He says, pray incrementally. Pray incrementally. Don't try to pray to the top of the staircase all in one go all the time. He says, what's the next step? What's the next little prayer that you can pray towards the big prayers? I love this idea. If you're at the bottom of a staircase and the staircase is like ahead of you, it doesn't matter if that staircase is 1 flight or 12 flights of stairs. There's no way you can climb the whole staircase at once. All you can do is take one step, and maybe you'll take 2 steps at a time, but all you can do is to take that next step. And what Pete says is, he says, don't try to pray for the whole thing all at once, all the time. Instead, he says, pray for the next step, a little prayer. Pray incrementally. What is that next step? And here's the thing is, Pete has experience with this. Shortly after the birth of their second child, Pete shares a story about his wife, Sammy. And Sammy was pregnant with their second child and gave birth to this beautiful child. And then they got this terrible diagnosis. And in fact, Sammy had a massive brain tumor. And they were looking at treatment and trying to figure it out. And thanks be to God, surgery was able to remove this brain tumor, and she was healed from the cancer. But cancer is one of those terrible things that just kind of locks in on you. And sometimes it leaves other scars. And the damage from the cancer and the damage from the surgery has left her with a lifelong battle with epilepsy. So she deals with seizures and all this stuff that continues in her life. And all of this is the story of a leader in ministry, of someone who teaches about prayer, and not just teaches about prayer in a superficial way, but teaches about prayer for miracles, praying and asking God to do amazing things and seeing that happen. And Pete says often he'll be laying in bed at night and just wonder, God, why don't you heal her? Why don't you just heal her? In the midst of this, though, Pete continues to pray, and he teaches us what it can mean to pray incrementally. He says, obviously, there are times when I'm going to pray that really big prayer, because it's important to pray that really big prayer. But I might also just pray that the next doctor's appointment will be really great and helpful and progressive. So learn to pray one step at a time. One step at a time, incrementally. Maybe that means praying for that next doctor's appointment to be good. Maybe that means praying for a good day in the midst of a slew of difficult days. Maybe that means praying for a good morning in the midst of a slew of difficult days. Maybe that means just praying for some time to spend with someone you love to receive that blessing. Someone that was going through cancer treatment that I know, cancer treatment for a recurring cancer, shared with me that this way of praying opened up miracles in their life. It opened them up to see prayer in their life. Before this, they had difficulty praying for themselves. It's not just that they had to pray this really big prayer, God heal me, and then be frustrated if that didn't happen. I mean, God is able to heal people in these miraculous ways, but often we were frustrated because it doesn't happen the way we want it to. But what this person shared is that it opened them up to receive small and incremental miracles as answers to these incremental prayers. You see, incremental prayer can unleash miracles everywhere and every day. Incremental prayers can unleash miracles everywhere and every day. With these testimonies, I'm always quick to share this advice with people who are going through difficult times. When families are thrown off track, I give them this advice for how to pray incrementally, to look out for small miracles every day. Incremental prayer can unleash miracles everywhere. You know, when you're facing something that seems insurmountable, yes, it is good to pray those big and bold prayers. It's good to pray those big prayers going all the way to the end and just praying for what is ultimately your goal. But sometimes it's important to just focus more closely on the next step in prayer. Because when you focus more closely on that next step in prayer, you can begin to see miracles happen in your daily encounters, because incremental prayer can unleash miracles everywhere and every day. You know, nobody wants to face a serious illness in life. I mean, it's one of those things that can really derail your plans and your dreams for yourself and your family. But as Jesus told Jairus, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Just keep trusting. You know, even in the face of difficulty, even in the face of sickness, God is not done with you. God can open new and good in your life even when you're facing difficult things, because remember, incremental prayer can unleash miracles everywhere and every day in your life. So the next time you're facing a serious challenge, whether it is a sickness or something else, take a chance to pray for the next step, to pray incrementally. And when you have people around you who are struggling like this, pray for them incrementally. Help them to experience the opportunities of miracles in their daily life, even when things are hard. And so right now, I want to pray for you. But before I do, I want to share with you one more word of encouragement from the Bible. And this word of encouragement comes from Paul, who's the same person I shared about earlier, who spoke a word of encouragement to the Philippians. And he wrote to some Christians who were living in Rome, and Rome was a hard place to be a Christian. It was a place of just like violence that was often lived out against Christians. So Rome was a hard place to be a Christian. And so Paul is writing to encourage some Christians there. And in this letter that he writes to them, in Romans chapter 12, verse 12, he pens some words that talk about how to act and how to pray when things don't go as planned, when life is hard. He says this: rejoice in hope, be patient in affliction, and persevere in prayer. Rejoice in hope, be patient in affliction, and persevere in prayer. To pray incrementally is to not give up hope. To pray for that next step is to be patient even when things are hard. To pray for that next step and trying to see a miracle in everyday things is to persevere in prayer. And so that's my hope for you, that you'll pray for that next step, whatever that may be, and begin to see and open yourself up to God's miracles everywhere and every day. So right now I want to say a word of prayer for you. And if you're struggling with illness in your life, or somebody that you know, I want to invite you just to take a chance and to pray incrementally for them, for yourself. Let's pray. God, I thank you. I thank you that you are a God of healing and you are a God of miracles. You teach us to pray for miracles and then to expect them to happen. So I pray right now for everyone who is in a difficult time this morning, whether it's through life circumstance, whether it's through sickness, and I pray that you will help them pray incrementally, that you will help them pray for that next step. And maybe that next step is just to pray for a good hour, a good moment. Whatever that is, give them the words to take that step in faith. And I pray, God, as we learn to pray incrementally, as we learn to pray these small prayers in addition to big prayers, that you will move in a miraculous way and bring healing and bring your miracles everywhere and every day. I give this all to you, God, and I ask you to move. Ask your Spirit to move as only you can do. If there's anyone here who needs more, who just needs that and is struggling today, I pray that you'll bring us together so that we can talk and pray together. I give this all to you in your blessed name. Amen.